Go.
1, 2, 3. My name is Will Smichek. Today is April 11th, 2022. The time is 9:29. This interview is being virtually conducted and recorded. I'm interviewing Mr. Stephen Schweiss, who was born on November 11th, 1962 in Milwaukee, and served in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, Allied Force, Iraqi Freedom, and Odyssey Dawn between 1981 and 2012. Mr. Schweiss was a Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force and served as an in-flight refueling technician aboard the KC-135 aircraft. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. So let's get right into it. What were you doing before you entered the service?
I came directly into the service from high school. So I was in high school and came from a Air Force family. My father had been in the Air Force. My older brother went to the Air Force Academy. So it was pretty much destined that I would join the Air Force or the service.
Tell me about your early weeks of training and how you adapted to military life.
Well, the early weeks of training were pretty interesting because of the fact that having had a military family, I kind of had this expectation of things that were going to happen. And even though you have an expectation, it necessarily turn out that way. In fact, I kind of realized I had gotten into something different that first night that I'm laying in the barracks, laying in my bunk, and I hear down the way a couple bunks down, another recruit start sobbing and crying. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen here. But it, turned out that it was pretty much like what my father and my brother had warned me it would be. And I just grew to actually love it. I loved the regimentation. It was great for getting in shape. And I also learned that I kind of wanted to be just like the sergeants who were looking over me and training me.
Gotcha. Do you recall your instructors? What were they like?
Yeah, I do. It's funny because the lead instructor, I can picture him in my mind. I mean, they all they call them Smokey the Bear hats. They're those round drill sergeant hats. I remember him, but the one I remember the most, and don't get me wrong here, but her name was Senior Airman Superville. And Senior Airman Superville was this tough, diminutive, she was short, young lady who could make, men who were much bigger than her cry easily. And she could really work people over as far as getting them into shape and teaching them what's right and what's wrong. But I will probably remember Airman Superville until the day I die. It would be great if I could ever meet her again. The other thing that was really cool about Airman Superville was that I don't know where she had come from, a Caribbean country. She had a Caribbean accent of some sort, and she was cool. So yeah, I remember them, and I'll probably remember her the most. But like I said, I can't remember the senior drill, but I can remember her.
What kind of specialized training did you receive in order to be a boom operator?
For being a boom, that actually came later, because initially when I first got in, I went and I was in the Air Force's version of military police. So I went to security police training. Now they call it security forces. But then in 1985 is when I went to become a boom. And that was actually out in California at a place called Castle Air Force Base. And they start out with the basics, because in the aircraft at the time, it was a crew of 4. There was a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, and the boom operator. And the initial started out with training for basic flight concepts, knowing, how an airplane flies, and instrumentation and things like that. Also, as a boom, you are the load master on the aircraft. So learned a lot about weight and balance and calculating center of gravity and things like that. And eventually they started getting into the actual air refueling part of it, which is, a lot of technical training. It takes about 3 months of ground-based technical training, and then you go into simulators. And back in 1985, the simulators for that job were very rudimentary, very simple. We call them hard task trainers because all it did was teach you how to push buttons and stuff like that. Didn't do anything, and you didn't really get any visual concepts. And
Stop.
And then eventually you go out to the flight line and you start flying, and that lasts again about 3 months or so. So you're there for about 6 months, and on the flight line, it's learning to actually refuel and fly the boom and do everything with that. Again, it's learning the cargo load training. So it's a process that you go through. And even when you're done with that and you get back to your unit that you're with, they have another period of time that you go through for about 6 months, which is actually what they call mission training, where you learn a lot of the stuff way back when, long before you were born. The main goal of tankers was to refuel the bombers for if there was a nuclear type strike. So you also have to learn a lot of decoding and things like that for the secrets. And then the last part of the training, which was probably my least favorite part, was what they call the survival school training. And that is you go up to the mountains of Washington State. They basically put you through learning to survive and learning if you were shot down. They are very good at simulating what a POW camp is and what the experiences are if you went into that. So it's 3 weeks of not fun. So it's the whole training, when you put it all together, is about 9 months to a year.
Okay. Were you deployed with anyone who you trained with?
No, I was never, nobody who I trained with at the time, I was never deployed with.
You served in so many different places around the world, between Spain, Egypt, France, Germany, Japan, and more. What was it like at a young age to see the world?
It was awesome. I always tell young people, if you get the chance, it is true when you go into the service, especially in the job I was doing, you get to see the world. And as a person who basically, my family vacations, I was born and raised in the Pewaukee area, and my family vacations, as I'm sure you know the term we always use, up north, went up north. That was it. I went and visited an aunt and uncle who lived out in California once, but prior to that, I had really never seen the world. So I do remember like one of my first trips to the United Kingdom to England and just feeling overwhelmed. And then we happened to be out touring in London, and the rest of the crew ditched me. And here I was lost in London all by myself in the big city. And for Milwaukee, when you see it, when you get to the big cities, you realize you're actually a small town boy from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So yeah, it was something, but some of the sights I saw throughout the years were just amazing. And probably one of the neatest ones I ever saw was during Desert Storm. Our base was about 40 miles outside of Cairo, Egypt, middle of the desert, but there were times we'd get to go in and I got to see the pyramids, which, you know, it was overwhelming is what it was. And you just look back, and to this day, I realized that I was fortunate to have seen so much of the world.
When you went to different countries, were you assigned different jobs?
Um, Usually you were with a crew. So if you were deployed somewhere, you would fly with that crew the whole time. However, as you get older and you get more experienced, you go on to staff where you're actually running the show. And I liked doing that because it helped me. I wanted always to gain the rank and eventually be the guy, just like I said at the beginning, who trained all the other people. So later on, I would be on the staff and I would be planning missions. And that was really neat, especially during, for instance, like the Kosovo Bosnia conflict. I was in the staff and got to see exactly how things are planned, and you run the show, you direct who goes out and everything. But usually 9 times out of 10, you're just on a crew and you're just basically on a flying rotation schedule.
Okay. Did you always work at airfields or was it different places?
Um, by different places. Usually it was at an airfield. Usually, I mean, the levels of the airfield, what they had at them. If they were had facilities or anything like that, but pretty much it was always at airfields just because of the nature of my job.
Okay. Can you tell me about the first night of Desert Storm?
Well, I have to actually step back to a few nights prior to it. So we would always get these intelligence briefing on what to expect as a crew as we went into the area, and especially as we would go into Iraq or areas like that. And one of the things the intelligence briefing said was, prior to Desert Storm, the Iraqis had been in a conflict with Iran, and the Iraqi Air Force was considered one of the best. In fact, if they rated them back in 1990, U.S. Air Force was at the top, and then you had, at the time, would have been the Soviet Union, the Russian Air Force there, but the Iraqis were right there at 3 or 4. They really did a tough job on the Iranians and had shot down quite a few aircraft. So they felt that with the Iraqis, that when the war actually started, they warned us that we would probably lose a lot of aircraft. And one of the things about the KC-135 tanker is we're a gas station. We are a large aircraft designed to refuel other aircraft. And the reason it's there is to provide fighters and bombers fuel so they can stay longer, fight longer, and also they can take off. And in our case, especially, we refueled a lot of fighters coming off of carriers. They can take off with more weaponry on board and less fuel. And once they get into the air, they can get the gas from us that they need. So the intelligence, we are considered what's called a HVA, a high value asset. And the Iraqis know that, everybody knows that. And if you shoot down one tanker, you're basically shooting down 6 fighters because they no longer have the gas. So in the order of battle, what they want to do is they want to shoot down tankers. Easy to shoot them down too, because we don't have any weaponry ourselves. And at the time we had no defensive measures whatsoever. So you got this guy right here. This is the KC-135. Like I said, it's just an aircraft with nothing in it. And on the back, you have this thing called the boom, which actually comes down. And when I'm doing my job, I'm laying back here. So we're exposed. And basically that first night, what we did is we were in the very first wave going into Iraq on the first night of the air war, and took off with 6 of these guys up into, headed out over the Red Sea. And going back to, by the way, the intelligence guys told us, yeah, look to left or right because you're probably going to lose your buddy. They're going to get killed. So lot of nerves that first night, especially I was about at the time 30 years old, you know, pretty green as far as I was concerned. And, we were actually in the number 3 aircraft in a formation. So we fly in formations, and basically as we got down, we were heading towards Iraq. The airborne radar people, they're far away, they can see everything going on, and the airborne radar people call out that they can see a whole bunch of Iraqi fighters coming towards us. We were also under radio silent, so the aircraft weren't talking between. The guy in the lead ship, who was the aircraft commander, in fact, I'm still friends with him. His name is Dan Poggle, Colonel Poggle. I remember to this day is, first of all, it's nighttime. So it's dark. We're flying, and I remember Colonel Poggle, when the airborne radar, they're calling out over the radar, and they're calling bogeys at your 12 o'clock, 50 miles or so. But when they get to about 50 miles, a tanker, our thing is to turn and run. Like I said, otherwise we get shot down. But Colonel Poggle, I remember he broke radio silence and he said, we're going to continue. Young guy like me, I go, crap. I want to say, yeah, crap. It was bad. I was very, very scared and thinking, this is it. We're going to get shot down. And the airborne radar calls out 40 miles. And this is it. We're done. All of a sudden, at about 30 miles or so, I remember the airborne radar guy, you would have thought he just won the lottery, because he calls out, they're turning and running, they're going away. And so they must have thought they saw this big thing. We had all the fighters on our wings. There was like 30 or 40 aircraft when you put them all together coming towards them. They must have realized they maybe bit off more than they could chew, and turned and ran. And that was the best day of my life, because I didn't get shot at and didn't get shot down, but it was a little nerve wracking as you were going in. And from there, we basically, when you talked about the air war itself, we basically dominated and everything went good.
Wow, that's an amazing story.
It was something to be there.
Where were you and what happened right after 9/11?
9/11, so as I said, in the Air Force, everybody thinks, so, you know, if there's no war going on, we all sit around. Same thing with the Army or the Marines. We don't sit around. There's either training or there's always something going on. And one of the things on a couple days before 9/11, we happened to be up the East Coast. And I had, at that time, I was the senior trainer for my squadron, for my position as a boom. And I had 2 young, brand new booms with me, and we were going to refuel. You get different types of aircraft, and one of the things is C-17, which is a large, heavy transport aircraft. Different effects on our aircraft when we refuel, so that's one of the things that you have to get for training. Well, we were out on the East Coast at a base in New Hampshire, Pease Air Force Base. And we were supposed to do some night air refueling with C-17s that were hauling troops, I don't even know where, out over the Atlantic. And that would have been the training for my young kids who were coming in. As I said, we had arrived in New Hampshire the day before 9/11, and we were going to train the next day. And at Pease Air Force Base, our aircraft happened to be full of a lot of fuel, because of the fact that we were going to be refueling these heavies on, even though it was training for us, it was real world for them to fly out. So that morning, they had put us up in a Hampton Inn hotel, and I remember waking up, and I was up a little late coming downstairs, and at Hampton Inn, they have breakfast and everything for people. I came down, and my crew was all sitting where they have breakfast, and they're watching TV. And just like everybody else, they saw the attacks on the Trade Center in New York, and we were watching it real time as everything was happening and the Pentagon attacks. And right then, my aircraft commander, his cell phone went off, and it was the command post at Pease Air Force Base calling. And because we were the only jet with a full fuel load, asked if we would mind taking off because they wanted to get up fighters, and they needed, again, the tankers so that they could fuel the fighters over New York, over Washington, D.C. in case there were any follow-on attacks right away. So basically, my aircraft commander said, yeah, sure. And we quick threw on our flight suits, ran out. We had an Air Force vehicle, and to this day, in a tragedy, it was kind of funny because I always wanted to drive like a fireman or a policeman. So we got up to the aircraft, and this Air Force vehicle had a bubble, you know, the turning light. They were yellow though. And I go to my aircraft commander. I said, hey, is it all right? I said, if we get going, you know, we need to get there fast. Can I turn on the bubble and just drive? And he goes, you do what you got to do. So I was safe, but I'm going as fast as I can, going over curbs, going through red lights, doing the best I can. But basically, we took off within about an hour or so after the initial attacks, and we were the first tanker aircraft along with fighter up over New York City. And we basically flew a pattern between New York City and Washington, D.C. And we were fueled, and we were the first ones on site. And then they ended up using us for about a week after that, just because they wanted as many crews as possible. So we flew a lot of the, they call it CAP, combat air patrol missions right over New York City and Washington, D.C. on that first day, a couple days after.
What would you consider to be your most important contribution during your service?
That is a tough one to answer. And it's not, I am a big believer in the fact that people who serve in the military are probably some of the most awesome people you'll ever meet. One of the things in my profession, in the military, I rose up, I was able to rise to the highest rank, which in the Air Force is Chief Master Sergeant. And I remember as the boss of the people there, I told them that, you know, you got to respect the people who are in pay, the people who feed you, the people who work on the aircraft are just as important, because a lot of people who put on a flight suit and the public helps it. You know, you look cool in a flight suit. I'm not going to not say that, but it happens that you sometimes forget that, and you think that the world is all around you when you're on an air crew, and you think everything revolves around you, and you think your stuff doesn't stink. And I don't think there is anybody, and I mean this so sincerely, and my greatest contribution is being part of a team of everybody who served. I mean, going back to, you know, the Revolutionary War up until today, they are truly brothers and sisters, and they are truly people who work together, and we're all about protecting the nation. And I remember one time my daughter, who's now 35 years old, I was at her high school, and I was in her history class, and they were interviewing me. And at that time I was in, I remember somebody saying something similar. And I said, what it is that we are protecting for people like you a way of life with freedom and the ability to do stuff like we're doing right now. That's the greatest contribution, is being part of a team to protect our freedoms here in the United States.
What are some memories that you have while serving abroad?
So basically, I'm going to show you a picture here. These are some of the cool memories here. I don't know if you can see this, if the reflection's too much, but so I got an opportunity. This is a tanker with some F-4 fighters, and we were actually flying a mission to prove that we could go up and get close to the Soviet Union, Russia, going up through Canada. So we were up over Hudson Bay, and this is not what you're supposed to do. In fact, this was back in the late 1980s. You're not supposed to fly this close when you're big airplanes. You're supposed to be about a half mile apart. This is less than a half mile. This is probably an eighth of a mile at most. And we were just doing this to take pictures and have fun. So this is one of those things, you know, you go out, you see in the movies where people do stupid things sometimes in the Air Force. We got in trouble for it, but it was cool doing it. So that's one of the things, but it gives you a chance to see here what it looks like when you're air refueling and you got the fighters. I mean, this part's real here, but having all these airplanes this close, not a good idea. You probably won't see that usually in any movies or anything like that. If you do, it's not a good thing. But some of the best memories were things like that, and also just being able to be in all those places that you talked about. Being in, people talk about living in the desert in a tent is no fun. That's true. But one other picture I just want to show you here is it was called Tent City. And this is what it looks like out in the middle of a desert at an air base. And you got a whole bunch of tents. And you know, when you're seeing like shows, if you ever watched the old show MASH, where they're all over the place, that's not how the military does it in real life. They're all lined up in nice rows with nice little dirt, paths in the middle. But this was in the middle of a desert, and then your air base is out here far away. They basically, all the airplanes are on a line, which is about a half mile away. So this was an air shot coming down. So some of the real cool things that I got to do is be in different places and do things that the average person might not be able to do.
Yeah. How did you get home at the end of your service?
How did I get home? Well, I got my own airplane. Not mine. It's the government's airplane. But basically, like for instance, at the end of Desert Storm, I still remember this day, one of the weird things, like I said, you're also, in addition to the refueler, you're the load master on the airplane. And my aircraft commander at the time, he had been from that picture, out in the middle of the desert. And why he did it, I don't know. He collected rocks. And he collected all these rocks into a big foot locker. And by the way, this foot locker was made of Lebanese plywood, which is supposedly the best plywood, which our troops and our forces had. It was on a ship destined for Iraq, but at the time we had stopped it. And for some reason, this Lebanese plywood came to our base and they had it all stacked up. And our guys who were real crafty were able to make a whole bunch of these cool foot lockers, which I still have to this day. That thing will stand up to anything, man, bomb blasts, you name it. But he had filled that thing with rocks. That thing weighed. That's the other thing. When you're a load master, you kind of have to guess at what things sometimes weigh at a time. But I'm saying that thing weighed about 800 pounds because it took a forklift to get it on and then set it down. But yeah, when I came home from the war, I came home on my own airplane with a 800-pound box of rocks from Egypt. So if Egypt ever calls up wondering where their rocks are from 1991, 1990, 91, I know where they all are.
What was it like to transition to civilian life after the military?
I'm still transitioning, put it that way, 10 years later. And I think when you're in for 32 years almost, it's tough. It truly becomes a way of life, because I go back to what I said about the you're part of a team. And not that those teams don't exist out in the real world, but it's a different kind of team because it is. You hear people, and it is true. It's a family. It's, I don't know. It just, I had a guy who I served with almost my entire time was a navigator who just passed away. And when you lose somebody, it's like losing a brother. So that's probably something that I don't think you can ever get back. I don't know. It's tough. And also, I ain't gonna lie, miss flying, miss being on that jet. I might not have, I always used to say to the pilots, because our seat was right behind the pilot's seat. I always used to tell them if they screw up, I'm gonna hit them hard in the head. They won't know what happened. So, because we always used to joke that if they screw up, we die a split second later. So it's the same thing. So it's I miss what I did for so long. I mean, it was, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but that was a majority of my life. So those are the things I miss: is the family, the friends, the things that you do that you just get used to.
How did you get started with the VFW?
I'm sitting in a VFW post. I'm actually not in a VFW right now. I don't know why I never joined the VFW. Probably be a good way of continuing that. The VFW is great. I will say this. I like staying busy, and I do so many things that I believe when you do something, you should spend, if you're going to do something, do it right. Do things in a half-baked, you know what I mean? And I have that commitment first when I do it. So that's something I haven't done yet, but I would probably get a lot of enjoyment out of and a lot of fulfillment out of. But right now, it's just not in the plan, and my wife keeps me pretty busy too.
What are some of the life lessons that you learned from military service?
Again, do a job, do it right. Not that in the military there aren't people who call them slackers, soup sandwiches, whatever, you can use a whole bunch of different terms. But if you're going to do a job, do it right. In the aircraft, I learned attention to detail, attention to, they talk about in the military following rules, but rules are there for a reason. They usually do a lot of good things for you. It doesn't mean, and trust me, I showed you that picture, it doesn't mean you can't sometimes have a little fun and go outside the lines. And that's another thing I did learn in the military, because I served with a lot of people who love to have fun and love to do things. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that the military taught me is working again as a team and working towards a common goal. And 9 times, actually more than 9 times, 9.9 times out of 10, we always achieved our goals.
How did your wartime experience affect your life?
Taught me to appreciate things a lot more. Even after that first night I talked about in Desert Storm, I always seemed to be with similar people on crews that I flew with, whether it was during the Bosnia-Kosovo conflict or other things, but always came down to that we would always put ourselves sometimes in a situation, not intentionally, you thought that something was going to happen, and you go, man, it's definitely, life is cool. So it taught me to appreciate things more and to live in the moment. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so live today for today. So those were kind of cool things, I think, out of it.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Easy one on that. Again, that was a question that came up when I talked years ago to my daughter's high school class. I'm pretty sure that if you talk to anybody who serves in the military, you know, they talk about, oh, military people are warmongers or something like that. We would be the happiest ones if we would be put out of a job. The thing is we also realize that there are bad people, bad things in the world. And until we live in that utopian society and everything's hunky-dory, we need people who can protect freedoms. And I'm not saying you, but sometimes young people take for granted what they've got. Until you lose it or have it threatened, you don't realize. And my thoughts on war, hey, I don't want war. I don't want, you know, if you were to join the military or anybody else, I don't want to see anybody die. But unfortunately, it's a fact that, again, there are people who would make us suffer. And until we can change that and live in that happy world, it comes down to people being ready to fight and do what needs to be done in order to preserve freedom and preserve a way of life. So war bad, but it is what it is. You got to do what you got to do. So people need to stand up.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will hear this interview?
Basically that. I mean, it's the military is, I hate to say it, it's a necessity. Until somehow fundamentally society changes, military is a necessity. But the one thing is that the military is a great place where you learn to be a team and, again, a family. I remember, you know, I might not remember names, but I remember every face that I've ever interacted with in the military. The people who are close to me, I remember their name. I remember their nickname. I remember the weird things that they used to do. I remember reasons we used to razz them about things. That's why I just think that people who join the military, it's not about war alone. It's about learning to be the best. I think this is an Army one, so I'm an Air Force guy, or it might be a Marine one. I'm not sure. The best that you can be might have been, but it is overall it's about being the best that you can be, and it's about proving yourself. So, you know, people might not want to join the military, but I think there's a lot you get out of it, and a lot that you can translate into going into other things, even if you experience it for a short time. And again, I personally think that it's a serve with honor. It's something that they can appreciate because they did play a part in this country's freedom and longevity and continued success.
Is there anything else that you would like to share for this interview?
No, I think it's great that you are doing stuff like this. I think it's important that you give us as veterans the opportunity to share stories that we have, because we have some pretty cool stories. I mean, mine don't stand up to some of the stories I've had the opportunity to hear. So I think it's an outstanding thing that you guys keep doing, and I congratulate you, and I'm honored to be able to sit here and talk to you, and wish the whole program continued success.
In closing, this has been an interview with Mr. Stephen Schweiss regarding his service between 1981 and 2012. My name is Will Smichek. The time is 10:08. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you.